Welcome, everyone, to the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, our first national field hearing. The committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I'm Congresswoman Kathy Castor of Florida. I'm honored to be here in the great state of Colorado. Without objection, Representative Diana DeGette, the gentlewoman from Colorado, shall be permitted to join the committee on the dais and be recognized for questioning of witnesses. Today we will discuss Colorado's state and local efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and expand the deployment of clean energy and clean vehicles at the Select Committee's first field hearing. So I recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. Thank you all for joining us today for the committee's first field hearing. I'm excited to be in the great state of Colorado as the committee works to develop a national climate action plan. We need to build on what is working in states and communities across this great country. It's appropriate that we are here on Colorado Day. It's the 143rd anniversary of Colorado becoming a state governor. And natural resources have always been a critical part of Colorado's economy. And today, in this century of the climate crisis, those resources also include intellectual and entrepreneurial resources. And we have seen some of these the past couple of days at the National Renewable Energy Lab, NCAR, NOAA, with scientists and students here at UC Boulder. They are doing the cutting-edge research on the climate crisis and the solutions to tackle the crisis. We are also honored that our recent House of Representatives colleague, now Governor Polis, is spending part of his first Colorado Day as governor with us. When we say the states are the laboratories of democracy, we mean that literally here. Colorado is home to some of the leading research in climate change and clean energy, and one of the most important things we can do as policymakers is make sure that clean technology can move from the lab to the market. That's what creates jobs, that's what cuts pollution, and that's what makes America the leader in clean energy. We need to build the clean energy economy to solve the climate crisis. Colorado, in particular, has been a leader in the clean energy revolution. In the 2019 legislative session, the governor and the Colorado legislature have added to Colorado's clean energy legacy by enacting several bills focused on deploying clean energy efficiency, renewable energy, and electric vehicles. Equally important, they also created new programs to support the energy workforce, the clean energy workforce. Today we'll be learning more about those policies and their benefits from a variety of perspectives to inform the Select Committee's work. The climate crisis is the challenge of our lifetime. When we confront it, it makes us realize that we are all in this together, and that it will take creativity, innovation, and persistence by everyone to solve it. Those same qualities are what helped America land the first person on the moon. Recently, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. Those first steps on the moon proved that America can do anything when we work together. And I've always found an extra measure of inspiration in Apollo because I'm from Florida, and because when I first came to Congress, I had the honor of inheriting John F. Kennedy's office in the Cannon House office building. A lot of people don't know this, but JFK was also the first president to receive a warning about how humans were changing our climate. Every president since then has received starker and starker warnings from the scientific community about the consequences of carbon pollution and climate change. Landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth was a grand challenge. Making Earth's atmosphere safe for everyone is now a grander one for all of us. We don't have time to waste. We need to act as swiftly as possible. Our next moonshot is solving the climate crisis. I know we can do it, and I know Colorado is going to help us lead the way. Now I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Another inspiration for all of us, the great representative of this community, Congressman Joe Neguse. Good morning, Joe.
Well, thank you. I first want to say thank you to Madam Chairwoman Castor for selecting Boulder as the location for the very first field hearing of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And welcome to Boulder, to my colleagues. It is such an honor to be able to join the committee in visiting my home state, my home district, my hometown, and my alma mater, CU and CU Law School. So I want to thank everyone here today, the witnesses who will be testifying, the many activists and local leaders who have helped in so many different ways in the fight against the existential threat of climate change. I, in particular, want to recognize my fellow committee members, Representative Caston from the great state of Illinois, the ranking member, Representative Graves from Louisiana, Representative Buddy Carter from Georgia, who unfortunately had to leave last night but joined us for much of the trip, and of course the Dean of our delegation, Representative DeGette. But thank you all for being willing to spend your time here in Boulder. I could think of no better place than Boulder, Colorado, and Colorado as a state to host the first field hearing of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. It is the epicenter of climate research in the United States. We have been it's been an honor to be able to visit with a number of scientists over the course of the last 2 days at NREL and at NOAA and at UCAR and NCAR and CERES and so many other of the wonderful federal research laboratories that we have here in our state that we are so lucky and blessed to be able to call home. So I look forward to today's proceedings. This climate emergency requires us to take comprehensive and bold action, in my view, and I believe in the view of the members of this committee, and I'm so grateful for the chairwoman's leadership on that front. And with that, I would yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Neguse. At this time, I'll recognize our ranking member, Garret Graves of Louisiana, for an opening statement.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank all of you for being here to participate in your government. This is what the United States looks like, and I really do appreciate every single one of you being here to share your thoughts, to participate, and to ensure that you're being represented. Governor, I want to thank you for being here. I had the chance to serve on the House Natural Resources Committee with your governor, and certainly a very well-equipped, bright guy. And I got to tell you, I miss you. I miss working with you on the committee. Had a number of amendments that we were able to work on together. But congratulations to you, and I have no doubt that you're going to do great things here. So thank you for being with us. Congressman Neguse, I want to thank you as well. The short trip, I arrived just yesterday morning. This place has been amazing. It really has. The people have been amazing. Mayor, I want to thank you very much for being here and for welcoming us as well. Climate change. I represent South Louisiana. We've got to get this right, but we've got to get this right. And I want to explain what I mean there. First of all, we're in Boulder, Colorado. So we can sit here and we can talk about the symptoms of climate change and what's going to happen here, what's happened here. Let me tell you about where I live. We've lost 2,000 square miles of our state. 2,000. How big is that? If it were the state of Rhode Island, we'd have 49 states today. All right? This isn't some place where birds and fish live. This is people. This is homes. This is businesses. This is history. You know, our tourism department years ago, we have this area called the Atchafalaya Basin. It's one of the only open river floodplains undisturbed in the nation. And they kicked off this, it's just teeming with wildlife. It's amazing. Bears and alligators and deer, just really amazing place. But they kicked off this tourism campaign, and they said, the Atchafalaya Basin, America's foreign country. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. It is, it's awesome. But you know what? That's South Louisiana, the place, the people that I represent, the culture, the music, the food, the people. There's nowhere else. And to watch that disappear, literally. We lose a football field of land approximately every hour. A football field every hour. So, sea rise is one of the contributing factors. There are a few others. It's one of the contributing factors of our loss. You can look and you've seen International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, you looked at their projections of sea rise. We don't have the flat irons. If we have a slope in Louisiana, it goes from here to there. So when sea rises, it inundates. It inundates our homes, it inundates our businesses, it inundates our history, it inundates our ecosystem. I actually worked on an amendment in one of our committees. I think Joe was about to throw something at me where I tried to get Cajuns deemed endangered species. Didn't work. So from home, from the people I represent, we've got to get this right. Now let me explain the other one. We've got to get this right. We've had people experts come before our committee who have said, we can cut every bit of emissions, every single bit of emissions from the United States today. Everything. And it's not going to change the trajectory of warming. This place, Boulder, amazing. Yesterday had the opportunity to go to the National Renewable Energy Lab, had the opportunity to go to the University Corporation of Atmospheric Research. I've been to Ceres before, I've been to the Earth Systems Research Laboratory before. This place is going to be absolutely key in solving the problem. And what I mean by that is the experts, the facilities, the scientists that you have here, the innovation, the moonshot that the chair just talked about. But when you look at what some places have done, up in the Northeast, some of the efforts to go very, very aggressive, they've actually caused energy prices to triple those compared to my home state. My home state, we can't afford. We have a high rate of poverty. We can't afford a tripling of energy. They've actually carried out policies that have required the importation of natural gas from Russia. They've caused folks to burn wood and stoves in their homes. They've caused the burning of heating oil. In California, we've increased our dependence upon oil from Saudi Arabia. Let me say that again. We've increased our dependence upon oil from Saudi Arabia. Here's a little known fact. The United States today, we have reduced emissions greater than the next 12 countries combined. The United States has 12 countries combined. So we can continue down this path of making this an incredibly polarizing issue and make it this big partisan fight, or we can recognize that we're all in this together, not just in Boulder, not just in Colorado, not just in the United States, but the globe. Because as the United States has been this world leader and reduced carbon emissions by greenhouse gas emissions by 1 billion tons, China, during that same period of time, has increased by 4 billion tons, more than offsetting every bit of progress that we've made here in the States. But let me say it again. This place, Boulder, Colorado, the scientists, the experts, the facilities you have here, this place is going to lead the innovation, not just for Boulder, not just for Colorado, not just for the United States, but for the world. And we're going to have to keep working together and stop this ridiculousness about all the partisan fighting that we're seeing on this issue and virtually everything else, because we are all in this together. And it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, green, purple, blue, white, whatever. When your land's being taken, when your home is going underwater, when your business is going underwater, when your history, your culture is going underwater, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what label. It affects every single one of us. So let me say again, Madam Chair, I want to thank you for choosing Boulder, Colorado. Joe, Congresswoman DeGette, I want to thank you very much for hosting us today. Congressman Caston, thanks for coming. And most importantly, I want to thank you all for being here, for participating in your government. And we've got to work together to figure out a solution that gets it right and gets it right. Yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Graves. Now we'll move on to our witnesses. We have two panels today. The first panel is the Honorable Jared Polis, and I yield to Congressman Neguse to introduce the governor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am proud today to introduce the Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis. Before being elected governor, Jared Polis served as a board member and then chair of the Colorado State Board of Education. He was then elected to represent Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, which I am honored to serve today. The 2nd District stretches from Larimer County in the Wyoming border to the Central Mountains at the heart of Colorado's tourism economy to Boulder and the US 36 high-tech corridor. In his time in the United States House of Representatives, then Congressman Polis was a strong advocate for finding solutions to environmental issues. He was a national leader for protecting our treasured public lands to addressing climate change. After 10 years of honorable service in the United States House of Representatives, he successfully ran for governor last year in 2018 on a platform of full-day kindergarten for all, reducing health care costs, and transitioning to 100% renewable energy by 2040. As governor of Colorado, Jared Polis has made significant progress towards these goals during his first 7 months in office, and he has left incredibly large shoes for me to fill as the congressman for this congressional district. I'm thrilled to welcome him to the Select Committee's first field hearing to share his testimony and his experience. Please welcome our governor of Colorado, Jared Polis.
And without objection, the witness's 5-minute testimony will be entered into the record. And at this time, Governor, you are recognized to give a 5-minute presentation.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Graves, Representative Neguse, Representative Caston, Representative DeGette. I had the pleasure of serving with many of you for a number of years, and today on Colorado's 143rd birthday, which Madam Chair so kindly recognized, I'm honored to welcome you to Colorado for a very important field hearing to discuss climate change, an existential threat to our security, our health, our economy, our public lands and ecosystems, and our very way of life. Colorado's climate has warmed substantially over the past 30 years, and even more than that over the last half-century. Time is quickly running out to take bold action to reverse and alter the current trajectory. In Colorado, we know this hotter, more erratic, drier future isn't some dystopian vision. It's impacting us right now. It's impacting our dwindling water supply, impacting our farming and ranching communities, our outdoor recreation industry, our wildlife and ecological diversity. It's causing more frequent, more devastating, and more expensive national disasters, which also cost the federal government money. If we want to preserve our way of life for future generations, we need to take bold action to address the climate crisis. We have more than just a moral imperative to combat climate change. In Colorado, as an example, and of course across America, we also have an economic imperative to lead the global green energy revolution and make the future work for us. We have a choice. We can be a leader in renewable energy, or we can let other countries develop the technologies, create the jobs, and reap the rewards of the renewable energy future. In Colorado, as you've seen over the last couple of days, we've chosen to lead. I ran on a platform of achieving 100% renewable energy across our great state by 2040 because I know that it will preserve our way of life and grow our economy well into the future. This commitment was inspired and informed by the 14 towns and counties across our state that have also adopted the goal of getting to 100% of their electricity from renewable energy by 2040, or in many cases, even sooner. That's why my administration released our roadmap to 100% renewable energy and bold climate action. You have a copy of that in front of you as an exhibit, and this roadmap outlines how we'll drive innovation and build Colorado's economy by continuing and growing our leadership in green energy development. We've taken significant strides during my first 7 months in office to put us on the path to achieving this bold goal. But the truth is that through price reductions and technological advances, the shift towards renewable energy is already happening, and that's good news. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the 2 fastest growing jobs in the United States right now are wind turbine technicians and solar panel installers. And in Colorado, our largest utility, Xcel Energy, announced last fall that they would retire 660 megawatts of coal a decade early and replace it with more than 1,800 megawatts of wind, solar, and battery storage. In doing so, they estimate over $200 million in savings for customers with no impact on reliability. This effort is just a piece of Xcel's broader commitment to reduce emissions 80% by 2030 and produce 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050, a commitment that our state legislature, working with us, codified in statute this past spring. Other electric providers across Colorado, Holy Cross Energy, Platte River Power Authority, and a number of other rural electric cooperatives have also followed suit, And Colorado is proud to have the very first municipal utility in the entire nation to have already achieved 100% renewable energy, the Aspen Municipal Utility. It's undeniable that companies see a profitable future in renewables, and given the dire stakes, it's our job as policymakers to accelerate the transition towards a cleaner, greener, more sustainable, and more affordable energy future. Let's take transportation, the nation's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. My very first executive order set into motion the establishment of a zero-emission vehicle standard and invested in electric vehicle charging infrastructure to make it easier for consumers to choose electric vehicles. We also unlocked for the grid creative financing solutions, including securitization, to help reduce the costs of retiring coal-fired plants. We also passed Senate Bill 181 to put health and safety first and give local residents a say in what happens in their communities when it comes to oil and gas drilling operations, in addition to setting up a process to minimize fugitive emissions of methane and other pollutants from oil and gas activities. We don't have to choose between creating good jobs and saving our air, our water, and our way of life. We can and we must do both by growing our renewable energy sector. When it comes to renewable energy and climate action, I believe that Colorado has a lot to show the rest of the nation. And I have no doubt that we could take bold action at the federal level as well. I was glad to see the House pass H.R. 9 to keep America in the Paris Climate Agreement, and I hope the Senate follows suit. The United States does not back down from a challenge. We're a nation of leaders, of doers, of dreamers. In America, we get to choose our own destiny. Thank you for allowing me to testify this morning, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Governor, for your impressive testimony and your bold action since you've taken office. At this time, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the questions. So to prepare for this trip, I took a look at the state of Colorado's energy mix over the past decades, and what struck me is how quickly renewable energy from various sources have replaced coal. Really, just in the past 7 to 10 years, it's been a remarkable switch. You're not where you need to be, though, however. What lessons can we draw as we develop the bold climate action plan and policies at the national level? What are the lessons that you think we should write into that national climate action plan? What has worked here? What was the impetus? Give us a little guidance on where we should go nationally.
The voters in our state showed a leadership role by passing a state renewable energy portfolio standard, and Colorado has exceeded that in recent years. We're at about 25% renewable energy for the grid. So we have a different mix of utilities, municipal providers, and co-ops. And in some areas of the state, it's even higher. And we know that we can do even more. At the same time that we've grown our renewable energy, we've also have, in the Excel service area, some of the lowest electricity rates in the nation for consumers and businesses. We've also incorporated friendly policies to support distributed solar energy, including making sure that the feed-in rate is fair for people, and allowed innovative financing mechanisms and leveraged federal financing mechanisms like the PACE financing mechanism, which would, if expanded to residential in an easier way, would further facilitate distributed solar. So we look forward to continuing to work with the federal government as well as our mixture of utilities to help get them to the next level for renewable energy.
So I listened very closely to the ranking member, and he is very intelligent on these issues. But one place where I tend to disagree with him, and that your testimony raised, is as we transition to clean energy, it doesn't necessarily mean higher energy cost for our neighbors and for businesses. Would you expound on that point? Because in your testimony, you said it's actually helped to lower electricity bills.
Yeah, renewable energy is less expensive today. So coal-powered plants often produce energy at 20 or 30% higher cost than renewable energy. It's really a question of how we can distribute those sunk costs that exist in the capitalization of coal into saving money with renewable energy. Technology is improving, prices are going down. In the long run, we don't only save money, but we're also saving money that would have been used to recover from climate-related natural disasters and health issues caused by both poor air quality as well as climate change. So it's really been a matter of working with the various forms of utilities we have to accelerate the retirement of costly coal assets, to recognize savings for consumers sooner and environmental benefits sooner.
And government can't do this alone. Give us a few examples of the collaboration between the state of Colorado, local communities, and the private sector.
So many of our local communities have led the way, and you'll be hearing from some. But we have 14 cities and counties across our state with even more aggressive goals for 100% renewable energy than the state as a whole. I mentioned that we have one municipal utility already at 100%. We have a second in Steamboat Springs that has announced their plans to get to 100% this year or early next year. And we found a partner in the state. So it's working with the local communities, the municipal providers, the rural electric co-ops, and of course through our regulatory authority at the Public Utilities Commission, our investor-owned utilities, to help make sure that this transition benefits customers, benefits workers, and also leads to the quickest possible transition to clean energy.
Thank you, Governor. At this time, I recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Governor, thanks again for being here, and it is great to see you again. Yesterday, we were at the National Renewable Energy Lab. Just to give those folks a shout out again, one of the efforts that they're working on right now is looking at how you position the wind turbines for renewable energy, both the configuration, the pitch and yaw, the blades, and everything else. They've been able to increase the energy generation by 14% just by changing the angles. And I mean, really impressive. And you noted that the energy production cost from some renewables is cost competitive. When you look in a vacuum just at generation, one of the challenges we have is that you're going from these large-scale coal, gas, whatever fired energy plants to perhaps distributed facilities by having a wind farm over here and having a solar farm over here. The cost of generation is one thing, but we have to fundamentally rethink our electric grid. How do we do that? I mean, the cost of that potentially is going to dwarf the cost of building some of the renewable energy facilities. How do we address those costs of the grid infrastructure?
Well, firstly, I'm thrilled that your committee was able to see some of our federal dollars at work at National Renewable Energy's laboratory, at NREL and other facilities, as well as university grants across the country. The federal government is leading the way in cutting-edge research to improve the efficiency of renewable energy generation, as well as storage, which is the second part of the question. For a reliable grid, as we increasingly incorporate solar and wind energy the exponential reductions in storage costs have been an enormous boom. And often when utilities are pricing out solar and wind, they're adding in that storage component. So in fact, in a recent RFP where Excel priced out wind plus storage, it still came in at about 20% less than existing coal power, not to mention new coal power, which would cost even more. Nobody's building new coal, but wind plus storage to ensure reliability of the grid priced out at a better cost. So those technologies continue to improve. We appreciate the investment not only of NREL, also of sources like ARPA-E, which have invested in storage technology companies, including some here in Colorado. And that's a very appropriate role for the federal government to support the basic research that will help lead this transformation.
I'd love to continue working with you on the infrastructure side of it. I think that's going to be it's an underappreciated component. But when you look at electrification of vehicles and other things, some estimate that, and I know that Colorado's been one of the leaders there. Some estimate that you're looking at a doubling or tripling the capacity the demand for electricity. Our existing grid simply can't handle it. It's not designed for this generation network. It's not designed for that volume or capacity of electricity. One other thing, in your testimony, you note that since 2010, the Colorado has doubled the renewable energy production here and has quadrupled crude oil production here. If you look globally, and we've had witness after witness come before our committees that have talked about how just stopping oil and gas production does not in any way decrease demand. It just means that the production will come from somewhere else. And talking to experts, things like trucks, rail, ships, the large ships, we don't have the technology today to be able to fuel those through renewable energy sources. The power is too great, and so we don't have alternatives. So what role do you see the United States playing in recognizing that there is continued demand for conventional energy sources? What role do we play in that? Recognizing, just like you noted, y'all have been one of the leaders in reducing emissions, fugitive emissions from methane and others. As we're going to hear later, natural gas has actually been one of the leading causes of our emissions reductions in the United States. How do we look at this globally and recognize some of the resources here and use them appropriately?
So first, in your previous question, I want to be clear. So electric vehicles and our plan to aggressively increase their use are also an important part of load balancing and even distributed storage. So they have benefits to the grid in terms of having more electric vehicles in use, in terms of when and how they charge and or store electricity in a distributed manner. Yes, we are leading the way in Colorado with our efforts around Senate Bill 181 to reduce emissions in our extraction industry. It takes additional steps to minimize additions of methane and other pollutants from the oil and gas production process. In fact, the federal methane laws rules, were initially modeled after some of the work of my predecessor, John Hickenlooper. The new efforts that passed this legislative session, in addition to further protecting public safety, health, and welfare in the extraction industry, also reinforce the local government's authority over surface impact of oil and gas development and help create a better balance between the existing markets and the need to act on climate change.
Thank you. Representative Caston, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Governor. I also want to thank CU Boulder. My parents are both CU buffs. They met and fell in love their junior year, so I can say with absolute clarity that but for CU Boulder, I would not be here today. I want to thank you, Governor, for raising your point about the economics of clean energy, and I want to pick up on a conversation we had briefly last night. Anything you do meaningfully to lower the cost of energy and lower CO2 are synonymous, because you can't lower CO2 without burning less fuel, and fuel isn't free. And if anybody grapples with that, all you have to do is ask yourself, if you have a solar panel on your roof, do you ever wake up in the morning and say, boy, the price of electricity is down today, I should probably turn off my solar panel? But at a coal plant, there is somebody whose job every day, sometimes multiple people whose job is to say, what is the forward price of power, and does it make sense for me to run tomorrow? And we have seen over the last decade a steady reduction in the amount of power output from coal because it's not economic. And it's being squeezed out by sources that are much cheaper to run. Now that's an opportunity. There's some challenges within there, but one of the challenges that I really want to give you a chance to talk about is that in the regulated utility model, the way we electrified our whole country, utilities earn a return on their invested capital. If you retire an asset before you fully return the capital, you bring forward all the unamortized capital expense. And so there are a number of utilities who, in thinking about whether they will retire an uneconomic asset that once it's retired will lower CO2 emissions, that decision has the impact of increasing electric rates. You've done something really innovative here to address that problem, and I just would like you to tell us about it, and with a specific idea of if what you've done might be applicable to federal policy.
Yes, and I would encourage you to look at additional federal policies, including tax policies, that encourage financial innovation. Because I think what you hit upon, and is very true, is this is largely a matter that through innovative financial mechanisms we can solve. The clean energy is less expensive today. The question is, how do you account for the stranded assets in costly coal and other forms of non-renewable energy? So in Colorado, we move forward with now under new legislation allowing for securitization of stranded assets. So effectively, we can borrow against a future savings stream to accelerate the retirement of coal assets today and to help fund a just transition for workers who work in coal-fired plants and recognize savings for ratepayers sooner rather than later.
And could we do that federally?
There could be federal policies that facilitate states doing that, and we would be happy to look into what some of those might be and give you some recommendations.
Terrific. Second question, and you know this all too well, that and I take your point, Americans have been leaders on a whole host of issues in climate. Our federal government, not so much. And we have seen cities and states step up to fill the leadership void as the federal government has backed away. I was involved in setting up the regional greenhouse gas initiative in New England a decade ago. California, of course, followed with AB 32. Let's plan for success in this moment. Let's assume that the exceptional leadership on this panel is able to persuade our colleagues in Washington to finally take the kind of bold leadership that we need at the federal level. And let's assume that once we do that, we push a standard that's even more ambitious than what's been done in the states. How, as you've sat on both sides of this question, how should we be thinking about that in a way that expands our ambition, but at the same time doesn't frustrate the fact that many people in the states have already made long-term commitments to reduce CO2, have binding contracts with renewable portfolio standards? How can we align that with state policy?
We hope that your hypothetical becomes reality, and we're celebrating the success of your committee's initiatives sooner rather than later. Our challenge at the state level is not too different because we have many local jurisdictions within the state. So how do we make sure that we encourage and facilitate communities like Boulder, communities like Aspen, Summit County that have even more aggressive climate goals with local buy-in than the state, and then work to make sure that the whole state moves along as well. So it's really a matter of both. I think, of course, I hope that the Senate acts on House Resolution 9 with regard to rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. I hope that we set bold goals at the federal level, as well as partner with states and communities who choose to pursue a renewable energy future even faster. So we really have the same issue in many ways at the state level, where we have over 14 communities with aggressive goals. We have a specific initiative to partner with them and help them achieve their goals for their area of jurisdiction, as well as making sure we bring along the rest of the state.
Thank you. I yield back.
Congressman Neguse, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again, Governor, for being here today, for spending so much time with us, and for your testimony and your leadership. Also appreciate you recognizing the local leadership. One of the reasons that I advocated for the Select Committee to be located here for its first field hearing was because of the 14 cities and towns across our state who have made this commitment to a bold 100% renewable energy transition. And so looking forward to their testimony as well. And I appreciate the exchanges. I think there are just already a number of different areas in which the committee, I suspect, will follow up, that this will be the beginning of a conversation and not the end. FERC regulatory reform is something that I know interests the ranking member and me as well in terms of grid modernization and so forth. I want to talk a little bit about the legislative session this past year. And a lot of the conversations we're having right now in Washington are around the just transition and how do we make sure that folks who are working in the kind of conventional energy and fossil fuel production can transition to a stable job. My sense of it is that the legislature actually took some steps this past session on this front. The House Bill 1314, Just Transition from Coal-Based Electrical Energy Economy, that you signed into law a few months ago. Wondering if you can share lessons learned from that particular piece of legislation, how it's being implemented, and perhaps takeaways that we can glean at the federal level.
And I believe that Colorado is the first state in the nation to formally establish an Office of Just Transition to take a look at all of the programs and funding within relevant state agencies, specifically through the lens of supporting communities and workers that are impacted by a changing energy sector. There's enormous opportunities in clean and renewable energy. The challenge is, how do we align those opportunities with people who work in the fossil fuel sector? We're convening broad perspectives to inform what kinds of programs and funding we should be doing to do right by Coloradans. There's workers with unique skills and expertise in energy. Many of that ports over to the clean energy economy or other fast-growing sectors. And we need to make sure that the workers are part of building our clean energy economy. We also have to look at the impact on communities that are disproportionately employment related to coal. For instance, in Colorado, Craig, Colorado, largest employer, the coal plant there. We want to make sure that we can create a future that works for Craig rather than keep our head in the sand and allow the larger economic forces to hurt not just the workers, but continue to hurt the climate.
So I appreciate that, Governor, and I think that might be an area in which we could follow up with your policy team in terms of replicating some of what you've done at the federal level. your point about there being immeasurable opportunities in the renewable energy sector is well stated, and something we heard yesterday when we were touring one of the federal labs in particular, just about the growth potential and a manufacturing facility that was being opened in Ohio, in the heartland of America, for solar built here in the United States. So a lot to follow up on that front. Want to also ask you about another bill that was passed this session, and that's Senate Bill 19-236, which you mentioned in your written testimony. And this is around the social cost of carbon and ensuring that is playing a role in the utility planning at the Public Utilities Commission in the Department of Regulatory Agencies. I'm curious if you can kind of expound on the bill, the basis for the bill, the impetus for it, and how it is being implemented, and whether it's had an impact yet in terms of the ERPs being filed by the regulated monopolies.
Sure. And again, first, to further elaborate on your previous question, when you look at, for instance, areas that have high employment in coal power production, inevitably they lay along rail lines. So you look at what other types of opportunities in advanced manufacturing can have a sustainable competitive advantage because of the location, because of the available and training of the workers, because of the access to rail for moving products. You mentioned the social cost of carbon. A traditional approach in any economics course taught here at University of Colorado or other universities talks about economic externalities and how do you measure them, right? So the issue with coal power production is the true cost of coal, namely the climate cost, air pollutant cost, is not factored in to the price that is received. So it's simply an effort at the state level to make sure that our regulators include the social cost of carbon, trying to account for the externalities of production through coal power.
And I know my colleague, Representative Caston, is working on a bill that's similar to what Colorado has done. So
we would
look forward to
appreciate
partnering on that
additional
front.
federal examination of economic externalities, environmental, climate related, and using the social cost of carbon in evaluating those at the federal level would be a big step forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to welcome my colleague from the Energy and Commerce Committee, who I've served with for a number of years, a real outspoken advocate for climate solutions. So thank you, Congresswoman DeGette, for coming over and joining us this morning. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for letting me wave on to this committee, and also thanks to my wonderful new colleague here from the 2nd Congressional District. I'm really proud of him for being a member of this select committee. As the chair said, I'm a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee with you and the Natural Resources Committee with Congressman Graves and Congressman Neguse. These are the two committees that are going to be writing the legislation based on this committee's findings. So I was really honored to be asked to join you today. And I'm very proud of our wonderful governor, who I served with for many years in Congress. And I'm glad you're here today because Colorado really is one of the national leaders in addressing climate change. I want to talk about one specific issue that we're grappling with, and that's Colorado's methane waste standards. Methane is the primary ingredient of natural gas, and as such is used to heat and provide electricity to tens of millions of American homes. But when methane is wasted in the environment, it's 80 times worse than carbon dioxide in its short-term impact on the climate. Now, Colorado has strong methane waste prevention rules, and the EPA and BLM emulated our rules under the Obama administration, but now the Trump administration is gutting the EPA and BLM methane rules. So I'm working on legislation to pass the Methane Waste Prevention Act that reinstates this important rule at the national level. Governor, I'm wondering if you can tell us how important it would be for Congress to enact strong methane waste prevention requirements at the national level to help supplement what Colorado is doing.
The Methane Waste Prevention Act would reinstate the methane waste and pollution prevention standards that were established by the BLM and EPA in 2016, in addition to requiring the Bureau of Land Management to issue new rules to further reduce the waste of natural gas from federal leases and to increase reporting requirements for new and existing wells. As you know, emissions of methane and other pollutants associated with fossil fuel development contribute to the threat of climate change and as well as air pollution, and also is a waste of valuable resources that belong to the American public. Congress should at the very least reinstate the standards established in 2016 that I would add were in many ways based on Colorado's first in the nation methane emission rules. We're going further in Colorado with Senate Bill 181, which takes additional steps to minimize emission of methanes and other pollutants from the oil and gas production process.
And has the implementation of those standards gone pretty smoothly?
Absolutely. Colorado continues to have strong growth in all economic sectors, and as I said, we are using that as a building block for additional efforts for methane reduction and other pollutant reduction with the new legislation that was passed this last session.
One of the other issues that I've been reading about, and is an interesting issue about trying to take carbon out of the atmosphere, and one of the ways we do that is actually through protecting national forests and other public lands. And the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department estimates that the total economic contribution of outdoor recreation is about $62 billion statewide, and it's created more than 500,000 jobs. And of course, also it protects forestry and other places that can really help with carbon reduction. I'm wondering if you can talk about, for a minute, about investing in sustainable economic drivers like outdoor education in places, or I'm sorry, outdoor recreation in places like Colorado.
So we formed a climate cabinet, which is an interagency working group of all the agencies working on climate, not just the agencies you might expect like Department of Energy and Transportation, but Department of Agriculture and Department of Natural Resources, because you're absolutely right. Among the many reasons to protect our public lands, of course, enormous economic drivers of jobs in Colorado, a big part of our quality of life and why we choose to live here. Yet another purpose is carbon sequestration,
That's
to make
right.
sure we have healthy forests and healthy soil.
And as you know, Congressman Neguse and I have a set of companion bills. One of them used to be your bill when you were in Congress, the CORE Act. The other one is my Colorado Wilderness Act, that if we have passed together, these bills would protect about 1 million acres of Colorado wilderness and BLM and Forest Service land. Do you think we should be doing more in Colorado to protect our incredible outdoor recreation resources?
Yes, I would encourage the Committee on Natural Resources to continue their work on establishing additional wilderness areas, both in Colorado as well as other areas of the country. The economic benefits to Colorado of our public lands, protecting the famed training grounds of the 10th Mountain Division at Camp Hale, and also as part of the overall climate solution with regard to sequestration.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Governor, for helping us kick off our first field hearing of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. How appropriate on Colorado Day. But thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for your work. Keep up the good work. Okay, now we will move to our second panel. So we'll give them a minute to come forward. Let's make sure we got the order right. Gary, you need to. Yeah.
You can see those folks. Do you want me to?
Yeah. That's fine.
They know who you are now.
All right. All right, without objection, all witness statements are hereby entered into the record.
Ask for order in the room.
All right, can we come to order, please? All right, let's have order in our committee room so we can get to our next panel. I'd like to welcome some of our local leaders who are going to give us their their expert testimony here, so let me introduce them to you. The Honorable Suzanne Jones is the mayor of Boulder, Colorado, and has served as a member of the Boulder City Council since 2011. In addition to serving as mayor, she is also the executive director of EcoCycle, a community nonprofit focused on recycling, composting, and other zero-waste efforts. Previously, Mayor Jones was the Central Rockies regional director at the Wilderness Society. The Honorable Wade Troxell is the mayor of Fort Collins, Colorado. Mayor Troxell was elected in 2015 and is now serving his second term. In addition, he is an associate professor of mechanical engineering and the director of the Center for Network Distributed Energy at Colorado State University. Mr. Kerry Weiner is a state energy specialist at Colorado State University Extension and the director of CSU's Rural Energy Center. Mr. Weiner helps Colorado residents make informed decisions about energy solutions. He conducts economic feasibility assessments for on-farm renewable energy and conducts community and local energy assessments. Mr. Chris Wright is the Chief Executive Officer of Liberty Oilfield Services. He is also the Executive Chairman of Liberty Resources. Previously, Mr. Wright served as the Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Technologies. And Ms. Heidi Vandergerden is the first, I'm so sorry. And Gendron is the first Chief Sustainability Officer at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Previously, she was appointed by President Obama to serve as the Director of Public Engagement and External Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy. She's also served as a senior advisor on climate change and energy for former Colorado Governor Bill Ritter, where she helped develop Colorado's first climate action plan. Welcome to all of our witnesses. Mayor Jones, you're now recognized for a 5-minute presentation.
Chair Castor, Ranking Member Graves, and distinguished members of this Select Committee, thank you so much for coming to Boulder for this opportunity to testify. I'm Suzanne Jones, Mayor of Boulder, and I'm honored to share this panel with my esteemed colleagues to discuss our climate accomplishments and talk about galvanizing a clean energy future. Like most cities, we are passionate about our community and its future, but already climate change is taking a toll. Temperatures in Colorado have risen significantly. The number of days over 95 degrees has doubled since 2000 and is on pace to double again. In the past 20 years, we've had 4 costly wildfires in the Boulder area, and the floods in 2013 caused extensive damage across Boulder County and some $4 billion of damage in the state of Colorado. So we anticipate continued drastic changes to our environment, economy, and way of life unless we, at all levels of government and across all sectors, act decisively now. First, we must quickly transition to 100% renewable energy. At the same time, we must electrify all aspects of our lives, from heating our buildings to powering our transportation. And we know these actions will result in significant benefits beyond just emission reductions. If we remove air pollutants, we save on healthcare costs. When we stabilize utility costs, we can pass those savings on to households. And, of course, we're creating more jobs and new technologies. So we should seize the power, the economic potential of this transition. And we've already begun this work. Here in Boulder, we have been leading on climate action in numerous ways. With repeated direction from our voters, we are actively exploring the creation of a city-run and community-owned electric utility, so we have more control of our energy future. We co-developed a national energy advising model with 18,000 participating homes and businesses who are now saving millions of kilowatt hours per year. We developed an aggressive building code resulting in more than half of our newly built homes in recent years being net zero. We have one of the highest per capita rates of solar energy in the country, with 39 megawatts currently installed in homes and businesses. We co-founded a 28-member coalition of Colorado cities and counties called the Colorado Communities for Climate Action, or CC4CA, and together we're successfully advocating for climate action at the state legislature. Also, using compost and other regenerative agricultural techniques, we are implementing state-of-the-art carbon sequestration efforts designed to pull back carbon out of the atmosphere while also improving soil health and agricultural productivity. And we've reduced greenhouse gas emissions 16% even as our population and economy grew. And while we're very proud of these accomplishments, we have so much more to do, and we have some lessons to share that we've learned along the way. First off, we need systemic change. Choosing a low-emission lifestyle must be easy, appealing, and make financial sense. We cannot continue to rely on voluntary behavior change alone. Systemic change means reimagining the underpinning laws, infrastructure, and economy of our entire energy system. Second, this must be a just transition. As we discussed, it must involve fossil fuel-dependent communities. It also needs to address vulnerable populations who are particularly impacted by declining air quality, rising food and energy costs, and extreme weather events. So racial and economic equity must be at the center of all climate work. Third, we need new robust financial tools for climate adaptation projects that balance upfront costs with the long-term benefits. Fourth, despite our successes, progress has been too slow. Not only must we address additional sectors, such as material management, to reduce waste and create circular economies, we also know that carbon capture and sequestration is now essential. Finally, the scale of the climate crisis demands decisive state and federal action. As discussed, the city is thrilled that we have a dozen new climate and energy laws in the state of Colorado, and we are proud to have participated in their creation and passage. But we need more. Moving forward, the city joins CC4CA in advocating for implementing the Colorado Climate Plan, increasing consumer energy choice, strengthening oversight of oil and gas drilling, including upholding local drilling regulations and moratorium, and other efforts to limit global temperature rise. And at the federal level, we support efforts to achieve systemic long-term emissions reductions and promote the clean energy transition, including leveling the playing field for all energy sources, making substantial investment in clean energy infrastructure, including advanced grids, battery storage, and EV charging. We support expanding fuel efficiency and emission standards for both light and heavy-duty vehicles, pricing carbon emissions through a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade program, and finally, expanding support for healthy soil and carbon sequestration efforts. Let me end by expressing my deep appreciation for the committee and for your elevating the urgency of the climate crisis. Throughout our nation's history, the federal government has from time to time stepped up to major environmental crises, whether it's the Dust Bowl, whether it was the burning of the Cuyahoga River, whether it's the hole in the ozone. We have done it before. We need to do it again. It's really time for federal action to help harness our country's innovation and address this existential crisis. And if we do so, and do so quickly, we will realize lasting benefits to our environment, public health, and our economy. So let's be bolder, as we say here. And on behalf of the Boulder community, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Troxel, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you to Committee Chair Castor and Ranking Member Graves for the opportunity to address the Select Committee on Climate Crisis. And thank you to Representative Neguse for hosting and having this hearing in the great state of Colorado on Colorado Day. My name is Wade Troxel. I am the mayor of Fort Collins, and this is where I was born, raised, and went to school and have my career. And now I have the honor of serving as mayor. Fort Collins is a mid-sized city of 172,000 people. We're the 4th largest city in the state of Colorado. We're home to Colorado State University with a strong, diverse economy and deep commitment to innovation, resilience, and excellence. For context, Fort Collins was a community of 20,000 people when I was born. And now it's 8.5 times that size, and it's even better. More dynamic and forward-thinking. We like to think that we punch above our weight class as a city. And our collaborative approach to climate action is just one example. Fort Collins is one of the most aggressive climate action plans, and we celebrate 20 years of climate action this fall, including our unanimously adopted goals by City Council in the March of 2015 to reduce our community carbon emissions by 20% by 2020, 80% by 2030, and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We set these goals because it makes financial, social, and environmental sense for our community. Fort Collins is a plan and do city. While aspirational goals are important, what differentiates Fort Collins is that we've translated these goals into action-oriented, pragmatic, and cost-effective solutions that benefit all in our community. For example, energy efficiency programs through our municipal electric utility and Platte River Power Authority are saving businesses almost $10 million annually from improved efficiencies, and their employees are more comfortable and productive. Efficiency and solar programs generated in excess of $40 million in local economic benefits last year. while supporting over 200 jobs. Our climate economy strategy, along with our collaborative approach, has been a key to our progress, and I'd like to share some examples. Platte River Power Authority and its 4 owner communities, including Fort Collins, has led the way with a resource diversification policy calling for 100% non-carbon energy mix by 2030. Our community is committed to 100% renewable electricity by 2030 as well, as are a number of our large local businesses, many of which are technology businesses. We can transition to clean and resilient electric infrastructure while achieving affordability, reliability, and stewardship. Near-term utility scale investments will result in more than 50% of our electricity in the coming year coming from non-carbon sources with, importantly, a neutral bill impact on our customers. Our groundbreaking regional wayshed partnership with Larimer County and other municipal jurisdictions in northern Colorado looks towards a circular economy where waste is looked at as a beneficial resource. A master plan has been developed with new wayshed diversion facilities, and supporting policies were developed to help us achieve our waste diversion goals. We're also a leader, along with Boulder, with 27 communities in Colorado partnering to advocate state and federal policy in a coalition called the Colorado Communities for Climate Action. This group helped pass over a dozen bills at the state legislature this past year. These efforts and investments have led to significant results for Fort Collins, and we've seen net reductions of our emissions and reduced per capita emissions of 34% since 2005, while our population and economy has continued to grow. While this being said, some challenges can best be addressed at the state and federal level. I offer the following for your consideration. 1, encourage goal setting at all levels. Setting ambitious goals can help establish community direction, ensures accountability, and it spurs innovation. 2, recognize the climate economy. Scalable integration and their technologies will come from our private sector partners. 3, recognize the value of energy systems at multiple levels and multiple scales. Systems thinking and integration must overlay these transitional initiatives while vertically integrating with the end-use prosumers. Fort Collins collaborates with industry and our research partners such as Colorado State University and the Gridwise Alliance to transform and modernize our grid to meet a rapidly transforming electric utility industry. With the convergence of electric and transportation systems, continue our investments in multimodal and electric infrastructure. Thanks to federal investments, Fort Collins has doubled its transit ridership over the past 4 years because of MAX, our bus rapid transit system, and we'll be adding 7 electric buses to this system in the near future. In partnership with the Electrification Coalition, we now have electric charging stations at most of our large employers and throughout the city and within our municipal parking structures. We need to encourage innovation. Fort Collins is currently featured in the Smithsonian exhibit at the U.S. Museum of American History as a place of invention. Fort Collins is one of 9 award winners of the 2018 Bloomberg Philanthropies U.S. Mayor's Challenge, and the associated $1 million has gone towards our innovative EPIC program, which provides for healthy and equitable benefits to low to moderate income renters by improving the energy efficiency with on-bill financing and rental homes. In conclusion, Fort Collins is uniquely positioned to demonstrate how carbon neutrality can be achieved to benefit all residents and businesses in an action-oriented, reasonable approach. I look forward to our discussion and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Weiner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Graves, and committee members. Thank you for providing me with an opportunity to speak with you here today. I have been the State Energy Specialist for Colorado State University Extension for the last 9 years and served as Director of Colorado State University's Rural Energy Center for the last 7. I have also worked as Renewable Energy Planner for the City of Santa Fe, New Mexico. In these roles, I have implemented sustainable energy measures and consulted with a variety of stakeholders on sustainable energy. My testimony today represents my own views as a specialist in the field. In my experience, I have found that both utility-scale clean energy development and community-based collaborative approaches to sustainable energy are key to maximizing benefits to rural areas. Driven by our mission of empowering Coloradans, CSU Extension's work has focused on the community-based collaborative framework, which I'll highlight through 2 examples. First, we've conducted community energy assessments for several small towns in Colorado. These assessments provide local leaders with snapshots of funding and technical assistance opportunities available to them that align with their needs and goals. We've done these assessments in farm towns, mountain towns, and now even in a coal town. Some communities are motivated by climate change, while others just want to save money for their taxpayers. In Buena Vista, a small but growing town in central Colorado, we engaged the local Chamber of Commerce, realtors, nonprofits, energy contractors, and utilities in our assessment process. 2 of our main recommendations were to switch to more efficient lighting in town buildings and to install electric vehicle charging stations near the downtown area. In doing the lighting retrofits, the town hired a local contractor, took advantage of rebates from its rural electric cooperative, and is saving an estimated $4,000 per year in taxpayer money. In installing the EV charging stations, the town took advantage of a Charge Ahead Colorado grant from the state, supplied residents and tourists with places to recharge, and may have increased business near the charging stations while EV drivers charge their cars. Turning to agriculture, CSU Extension has been the recipient of 2 USDA Rural Energy for America program grants to conduct economic feasibility assessments for solar and wind at 60 farms across Colorado. The Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, Colorado Corn Growers, Colorado Energy Office, Colorado Department of Agriculture, and various rural electric cooperatives donated in-kind cost share to market the program statewide. 4 of our participants have gone on to apply for REAP grants of their own to install solar projects, and 2 were successful. The Weiss family out of Holyoke, Colorado, for example, installed a 15-kilowatt solar array that saves $1,500 per year on electricity for pumping water. They should recoup their investment in about 10 years. What may seem to be modest energy savings for a given local government, farm, household, or business can add up to a strong distributed network of environmental and economic benefits, along with a sense of independence for rural Colorado. The Garfield Clean Energy Program, for example, has helped 340 businesses, 1,200 households, and 34 government facilities complete energy upgrades that have saved over $2.2 million through an innovative partnership between local governments, a community college, and a nonprofit in one of the top natural gas producing counties in the state. The Colorado Energy Office and the Colorado Department of Agriculture have engaged numerous stakeholders through USDA's Regional Conservation Partnership Program to save over 1 million kilowatt hours and $100,000 across 200 farms in the state. And across the country, state extension programs have formed the National Extension Energy Initiative to learn from one another how best to maximize impact in rural areas. The federal government can strengthen community-based collaborative approaches to rural sustainable energy in a few ways. Waiving or reducing the Rural Energy for America program's cost share requirement for small business energy audits could help rural businesses benefit from energy savings and provide local jobs. Continuing the Regional Conservation Partnership Program and streamlining the Rural Energy Savings Program will strengthen cooperation to help rural areas save energy and money. And restarting the pilot USDA, USDOE State Extension Energy Partnership Program, or otherwise supporting Extension's capacity to meet local energy needs would be welcome. With a presence in nearly every county in the country and trusted relationships with key stakeholders, I believe Extension is well positioned to coordinate and catalyze community-based collaborative rural energy solutions. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Mr. Wright, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Castor, Ranking Member Graves, and committee members, my name is Chris Wright. I'm the CEO of Liberty Oilfield Services, a high-tech hydraulic fracturing services company headquartered in Denver, Colorado. It is an honor and a privilege to be here today. The climate change issue is intimately tied to energy, the field that I've spent my life in. I specifically attended MIT to work on fusion energy. In graduate school at UC Berkeley, I worked on solar energy. After graduate school, I became an energy technology entrepreneur, working in both geothermal energy and oil and gas. Climate change is global, and hence the solution must be global. In the quest to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we must be thoughtful. A rational global approach must balance climate mitigation, economic growth, energy access, and most importantly, human well-being. Energy matters a lot. Throughout human history, global life expectancy was 30 to 35 years. But in the last 200 years, global life expectancy has doubled to 72 years. And extreme poverty has dropped from 90% of humanity to 10% and falling. The growth in human liberty and the dramatic increase in available energy are likely the two main catalysts for this tremendous progress. Unfortunately, we still have 1 billion people in the world without electricity, and 2 to 3 billion that still cook in the deadly fashion that our ancestors did, burning wood or charcoal indoors in open stoves, which kills 4 million people annually per the World Health Organization. Liquid petroleum gas, LPG, is by far the most common, clean, and safe replacement cooking fuel that also saves women more than an hour a day not spent collecting wood or dung for cooking fuel. Energy poverty is the world's greatest challenge. As my background shows, I am for any and all energy sources, as long as they are reliable, clean, and affordable, with the power to lift humans up. The enormous annual growth in global energy demand is driven predominantly by folks rising out of poverty, aspiring to lives like ours. The U.S. shale revolution is aiding the poor abroad and at home via much cheaper energy, with annual consumer savings over $1 trillion. It has also driven natural gas to become the #1 source of electricity in the U.S., which helps clean our air and drive CO2 emissions per person down to a 50-year low. Global gas-powered electricity is also surging, displacing coal generation and pushing down emissions. Globally, coal is still by far the largest source of electricity, followed by natural gas, hydropower, and nuclear. U.S. natural gas exports not only lower global greenhouse emissions, they also lower particulate matter, PM 2.5, the world's most lethal pollutant, plus other pollutants in both Asia and our western states like Colorado, which are downwind. In fact, a recent paper by an author at NOAA concluded that Asian air pollution was by far the biggest contributor to smog in the western U.S. Hydrocarbons today provide a little over 80% of the world's energy, the same as they did 20 years ago. The U.S. Energy Information Administration projects this dropping to only a little below 80% by the year 2040, but with a much larger drop in greenhouse gas emissions with continued natural gas displacement of coal. Global energy consumption grew 2.3% last year. Think millions of folks rising out of poverty. Solar and wind combined supplied less than 2% of total global energy last year, or less than 1 year's increase in global energy demand. Hence, the trajectory of greenhouse gas emissions is impacted far more by the mix of hydrocarbons than the rate of growth in renewables. Oil production itself leads to emissions from natural gas flaring and fugitive methane emissions. These emissions are much lower in countries like the U.S. than they are in Russia, Iraq, Mexico, or virtually anywhere else. Oil and gas produced in Colorado has even lower emissions than the U.S. average due to rigorous regulations on methane capture and very little gas flaring. Even as Colorado's oil production has quadrupled, VOC emissions have dropped 40%. This is technology at work. Consumers dictate oil consumption. Regulatory regimes only impact where oil is produced, which leads to some counterintuitive conclusions, like maximizing oil and gas production in the United States lowers global greenhouse emissions, and taking regulations too far, regulatory overshoot, is counterproductive. Inhibiting production in cleaner areas like the U.S. or Colorado leads to increased global emissions, as it simply moves production to less clean places. It also hands greater control of the global energy supply to countries that are hostile to the United States, such as Iran and Russia. To date, Colorado has been a shining star, extremely modern, low-emission oil and gas production that is displacing dirtier production elsewhere. Seeking territorial-based solutions that would keep U.S. fossil fuels in the ground would result in an increase in global emissions. There is no point exporting our industry and jobs while importing, not avoiding the emissions. Thanks for hearing me out, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Van Genderen, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Castor, Ranking Member Graves, Representative Caston, Representative Neguse, Representative DeGette. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and welcome to Boulder. My name is Heidi Van Genderen and I am a third-generation Colorado native. I have spent over 3 decades now working to advance the policies, technologies, deployment, and financing of low-carbon strategies. The Chairwoman was kind enough to provide a couple of highlights of my career. I would note that my testimony today represents my own views based on my professional background. You've heard this morning from Governor Polis, both mayors, about Colorado's leadership in advancing clean energy at the state and local level. You heard about the benefits of clean energy for Colorado's rural communities, in particular from Carrie Weiner, and you heard about the role of natural gas and some regulatory outlook from my colleague, Mr. Wright. I refer you to my testimony, the written testimony, which addresses Colorado's energy economy and the policy landscape as well, and thank my fellow panelists for covering those topics so ably this morning. I would augment their presentations only to add that the escalation of state and local policy has in good measure been spurred by the lack of action at the federal level over the last 2 decades in particular. And I would note further that the best energy policy, Representative Caston and I spoke briefly about this morning, optimally is bipartisan and transpartisan. The economic health and community development benefits derived from a willing diversification of our energy fuel portfolio are eminently evident in Colorado, elsewhere, and elsewhere around the world and the country. The Select Committee has the opportunity to demonstrate a different path, and I applaud your efforts to work on these issues in truly bipartisan fashion. I turn then to the importance of leadership by example and the investment in research, exemplified by the work underway by the state's flagship university, the University of Colorado. Research for all aspects of climate change and the energy transition is an extraordinarily important investment as researchers and scientists seek to provide you, the lawmakers, with accurate science-based evidence on which to base policies, programs, and investments that can make a difference at sufficient speed and scale. CU Boulder became an inaugural member of the University Climate Change Coalition, which now boasts 20 of the top-tier Research 1 or R1 universities from Canada, the US, and Mexico. Our Chancellor, Phil DiStefano, recently attended a summit hosted by the University of British Columbia and was able to converse with other university leaders about combining research endeavors across universities so that those research dollars are used as efficiently and effectively as possible. Roughly 74% of the University of Colorado Boulder's research funding comes from the federal government. Thank you for your awareness of the importance of the federal government's role in adequately funding this critical research. While we cannot rely on technology development in applied research as the sole solution to this challenge, there is some remarkable work underway through breakthrough technologies at this university. 3 among many examples are: 1, the development of a long-range methane leak detection system that is a literal game changer in finding and capping methane leaks from oil and gas production. This is now a for-profit company. Development of nanobiohybrid organisms capable of using airborne carbon dioxide and nitrogen to produce a variety of biodegradable plastics and fuels, literally pulling the carbon from the atmosphere towards sequestration of it. This innovation could vastly improve our ability to do just that and manufacture sustainable biodegradable fuels and plastics. Development of an electric vehicle charging infrastructure begun at CU Boulder that would be embedded in roadways and allow ongoing charging of EVs as they travel along those roadways. 3 amazing examples. CU Boulder's work in climate science in collaboration with the many national labs has been noted this morning as Legion, and again outlined further in my written testimony. Last but not least, CU Boulder also seeks to demonstrate leadership through its own operations and deployment of our campus as a living laboratory. The latter provides opportunities for our students through integrating research and education into our daily operations and creating fertile ground for innovation and entrepreneurship by bringing together our researchers, our industry partners, and venture capital with the goal of taking applied research quickly to commercialization. The importance of partnerships like these cannot be underestimated. Thank you. I look forward to discussion and to answering your questions.
Terrific. Well, thank you all very much for your compelling testimony. At this time, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mayor Jones, last week the Boulder City Council declared a climate emergency, passed a resolution declaring it so. That resolution commits to keeping the concerns of vulnerable neighborhoods, neighbors at the forefront as we transition to the clean energy economy and begin and kind of double down on the climate planning process. There's already too much inequity across this country. And I'd like to ask you and Mayor Troxel as well, you all have you have the finger on the pulse of your communities. What recommendations do you have for us at the national level as we develop a national climate action plan that can be impactful to ensure that as we deploy certain resources, make certain investments, that we are lifting people, that we are treating people equally, we're not leaving anyone behind?
Well, thank you, Chair, for that question. We are lucky to have a partnership with the Just Transition Collaborative here at CU to help wrestle with this very issue. And several recommendations came out of that work that I would pass on to you. One is, I think, as we embark on this huge systemic change and transition, is to make sure that underrepresented communities are at the table as part of the decision-making process and their voices are heard. Another is to make sure that the jobs, the solar energy jobs, the energy efficiency in households jobs are going to those communities, to those workforces that low-income workers that can be trained and be a part of the solution, and so that they have access to that economic growth. And then I'd also say that we want to make sure that we are providing the solutions, whether it is solar on your roof or whatnot, make sure that everybody has access to that. And so for one example that we have here in Boulder is we have a low-income solar grants program to try to do just that, so that everyone is included in the solution and the benefits of it.
Very good. And I'd just like to add, in Fort Collins, a priority of our council is equity and inclusion. So we look at everything that we do through that lens for our entire community, and so we have a community for all. And with that, we look at investment in our infrastructure as key, because it does benefit all in our community. And finally, an important part of our community is engagement, and engagement really meeting people where they are, not coming to city council on a Tuesday night at 6 o'clock, but it's really engaging everyone where they are. And so we work closely. I would state one program in particular, working with the Center for Public Engagement at Colorado State University, and it really does bring together people. It's not the loudest people in the room, it's not the smartest people in the room, but it's everybody in the room to have a conversation and to really get to better solutions.
Terrific. Mr. Weiner, boy, it's not your parents' extension service anymore. And thank you for your concrete policy recommendations for us. Will you expand upon that? What really, tell us a story, a real world example of something maybe you were surprised at the impact, or you are hopeful for the opportunity if we scale something up on the national level.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think working with the agricultural sector has been a pleasant surprise in gauging their interest in renewable energy. So I think we oftentimes think of large wind farms being planted down on farms across the United States, and then farmers getting the benefit of lease payments. But what was surprising to me was just seeing the interest in offsetting their own electricity use, noting how some of these irrigation expenses make up a pretty significant part of their operating expenses for running a farm, for example. And so when we opened up our first Rural Energy for America program grant to these folks, we had space for 30 and we filled 50 right off the bat. So I think there's a lot of interest. There are, we didn't have as many agricultural producers succeed in their own REAP grant applications as we would have hoped, but that was something that's been a pleasant surprise.
And when you think about the struggles across rural America right now and so many challenges our farmers face, I think this is a very important area, and I hope the committee, we can focus a lot more time on this in the future. So thank you. At this time, I'll recognize Ranking Member Graves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks again for all your testimony. It was a pleasure to meet you. Mayors, I have an important question to ask. I've heard these subtle references to UC Boulder, Colorado State University. Which one's better?
Actually, we have excellent research universities, and I would actually speak to, we have a Colorado Renewable Energy Collaboratory that actually brings together Colorado State University, University of Colorado Boulder, and Colorado School of Mines in partnership with NREL, and really working collaboratively related to our energy-related needs.
Thank you. That wasn't a right answer.
That's political.
All I know is I think I see Saints colors on that flag over there. So, hey, seriously, Mr. Weiner and Ms. Van Gendren.
Just call me
Did I
Heidi.
get it?
It's
All
a
right.
lot easier.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, goodness. My Dutch-German family would be very disappointed in me. But in any case, you both mentioned something that I think is pretty important, and as did Congresswoman DeGette. We talk often about reducing emissions, which, of course, is an objective I think we all share, and we need to ensure we continue on this downward trajectory. But you both also mentioned potential opportunities for sequestration, as did, I think, the legislation that Congressman Neguse and Congresswoman DeGette were working on. The role of the biogenic environment and actually capturing. And in Louisiana, one of the things that we do for coastal sustainability is we engineer oyster reefs in a way where you can set up geometric formations to where wave energy comes in, hits perhaps a pyramid shape, sends wave energy up instead of into our communities. Oyster reefs sequester greenhouse gases. They purify the water. They help to clean the water. They obviously provide a food source. Multiple win-win-wins as a result of those. And I think it is something that's really important that oftentimes isn't given as much respect in this discussion that it's needed. And so I appreciate both of you bringing it up. Mr. Wright, you brought up some things that were somewhat counterintuitive, I think. You actually said, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but basically that by producing natural gas, we are actually resulting in cleaner emissions, cleaner energy solutions. Could you expand on that a little bit? Because I think that perhaps, and particularly energy production in Colorado, perhaps is cleaner than anywhere else as a result of producing natural gas here.
Yes, two points in that. The first is, over the last decade, the significant drop in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, the single largest source of that drop, there's different studies, somewhere between 50 and 70% of the drop in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions has been from the huge surge in U.S. natural gas production, which has driven down the price, and therefore coal used to be, not long ago, by far the largest source of electricity in the United States at over 50%. Today it's down to about 30%, and natural gas has displaced it. So by burning natural gas instead of coal, it's significant to half the greenhouse gas emissions. That's been the biggest driver of reduction of United States CO2 emissions. And then where it's produced, I think the second half of your question matters too. And our wonderful governor spoke about that earlier today. And when you produce in Colorado, which is even better than the country as a whole, or in the United States, we're just simply much more careful about gathering all the gas, and those technologies continue to get better. I love the monitoring technology. It's a friend of mine involved in that company that Heidi mentioned. If you can we collect a much larger percent of the gas, therefore less leaks out. And when you don't have the infrastructure, you have to burn the natural gas, called flaring. So it doesn't release methane, but it burns and releases CO2 emissions. So there's much less of that in the United States, particularly in Colorado, than production almost anywhere else in the world. So given a constant demand for world, or whatever the marketplace demands for world oil and gas, where you produce it matters.
I think I read recently where gas that comes from the United States as compared to Russia is 13% cleaner. And so whenever you're using Russian gas, it results in a dirtier environment and greater emissions. When we were at NREL yesterday, I don't remember who it was, but one of the scientists said that if we had to pivot immediately to renewables, that the technology, that the grid, everything, I think you mentioned that 2% of the world's energy is produced from renewables, that it's simply not, we're not capable at this point of just having this automatic transition. I noted a lot of the scientists that talked to us about trucks and ships and planes and other areas where the energy concentration of renewables and the storage capacity of batteries is not great enough. The U.S. is viewed, I think, globally as perhaps not the leader on emissions reduction, but as I stated earlier, we actually are. Could you briefly compare U.S. compared to perhaps Europe in our strategies for emissions reduction?
You bet. And maybe the biggest example there is Germany, who certainly spent per capita the most of any country in the world. They started earlier. Germany spent somewhere between $200 and $400 billion on their, in German, clean energy transition. And number one, they reduced their CO2 emissions over the last decade significantly less than the United States has. In fact, I mentioned the world gets 81% of its energy from fossil fuels. Germany gets 84% of its energy today from fossil fuels.
And is supporting Nord Stream 2 to bring in more Russian gas.
But the part that concerns me the most, to me, we should always be focused on humans, is Germany doubled their electricity prices from the start of their energy transition. They're today 3 times higher than the United States. And from their own public health data, 30,000 people are killed every year, premature deaths, because of the extra cost of energy, that they don't heat their homes. That's a significant problem in the U.S. More than 10% of Americans report keeping their house at unsafe temperatures, both too hot and too cold because of electricity prices. 14% receive disconnection notices. So I loved all the cost about lower energy prices. If we can transition energy and drive prices down, it would be fantastic, but it would be a first.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Caston, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ed, I want to pick up on that thread, and I got to warn the crowd. I'm going to nerd out here a little bit, but you and I have very similar backgrounds. I wasn't smart enough to get into MIT, but went up the road to Dartmouth for engineering school, and then spent 16 years as a CEO of various clean energy companies. And you didn't say this in your testimony, but I would suspect you sort of intimated. One of the theories I came to early on is that we consistently make the same mistake in our energy policy that Dartmouth and probably MIT made in their alcohol policy. We assume that we can regulate demand by regulating supply, and people want energy, and that led me to really focus on energy efficiency and conservation, particularly on the generation side. But I want to talk a little bit because I have some concerns about what you said, but I want to sort of hear your thoughts on this. For most of the beginning of my career, natural gas was always $3 a million BTU. It was locked in place, and the gas industry, you could sell it for $5, you'd rather sell it for $5. But a lot of the power sector built massive amounts of gas-fired generation in the 90s because they said at $3 we can compete with coal. We built 200 gigawatts, that's 20% of our entire power fleet, gas-fired generation in about a 10-year period to chase $3 gas. Now, as I don't need to tell you, in 2007, the price went up to about $12. First off, I'm assuming you would agree with me that that was basically a supply-demand balance that really pushed that up.
Agree 100%.
Okay. Post-recession and post the fracking revolution, the price has gone back to $3, and we've been basically at $3 for the last decade. And I agree with you that has substantially explained the demise of coal. The rise of renewables has played a big role, efficiency has played a big role, but gas has played a big role there. During that same 10-year period, European gas prices have been around $7 on average, roughly speaking. There was a huge push in the 90s to build LNG facilities to export gas to Europe to chase high-cost gas, because a lot of gas producers wanted to chase that expensive gas market. Your testimony suggested that if we export gas overseas, we will drive down the price of gas overseas. Why does supply and demand not still apply? Because we learned those lessons before, and if we raise the price of gas internationally, we will bring coal back.
I appreciate very much your comments and agree with your assessment of history, absolutely. The difference is the magnitude of the shale revolution. Almost all oil and gas is originally produced in shales. It slowly, through geologic time and natural hydraulic fractures, leaks out. So before, we were just finding the stuff that leaked out and got trapped. Now we're going into the source rocks. And the reserves in the United States are just gigantic. I think $3 is a ceiling on natural gas prices for as far as the eye can see. And in fact, the one thing I disagree a little bit is the United States, we used to be the largest importer of natural gas 10 years ago. Today, by the end of this year, we'll be the third largest exporter of LNG in the world. And we've actually meaningfully depressed LNG prices. They're down 40% if you take a global average of before the start of U.S. exports and today. So yes, we're growing the growth of demand in natural gas. Yes, supply and demand works. So more demand for natural gas in theory should be a push up on price. Right now, what it is that's all true. But during the years before the financial crisis, we averaged 1,000 natural gas rigs drilling, and we were a large importer. Today, it's been 2 years before we've had 200 rigs drilling for natural gas. It's about 175.
I guess my challenge to you, all of that might be true. And by the time we know for certain it's true, it's going to be too late to change course. You know, you look at the history of North Sea oil. We did a really good job of drilling when oil was expensive and then exporting when oil was cheap. And I think most of those European countries would say that they did the opposite of buy low, sell high. If you can sell gas for $3 in the United States, why would you possibly invest in liquefaction, storage, and shipping to sell it for $3 overseas? You're not going to get any return on your capital. Chesapeake had a negative return on equity for most of their life. And I have a real concern that if the price of gas goes up, we are going to use a lot more coal in this country.
A very legitimate concern. I'd love to talk with you more about it offline, but the reserves and productivity of gas in the United States, there is 100 years of low-cost production at today's rates.
But that's a supply question. Demand still matters.
100%.
Thank you. I yield back.
Representative Neguse, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to each of the witnesses for being here today for your testimony. I can assure Representative Graves that the correct answer when you represent the 2nd Congressional District is that both universities are wonderful universities. And so I'm particularly grateful to the Mayor of Boulder and to the Mayor of Fort Collins, the mayors of the 2 largest cities in my congressional district, for their leadership and for showing us the way. And my hope is we can export some of what we've gleaned from your testimony to Washington as we develop our recommendations. Mr. Wright, I do want to talk about your testimony. You know, I reviewed it in great detail, your written testimony and obviously your oral remarks. I disagree with your appraisal of the natural gas in the context of poverty and sort of the way in which you've characterized it in your testimony. And here's why. Most empirical studies that I've seen demonstrate that unmitigated climate change, if anything, amplifies poverty, right? Because climate change will affect developing countries and poorer communities more than rich ones. In the United States, the economic toll, there was a study published last April that found that inaction on climate change by the year 2090 would cost the United States $224 billion more in economic impacts per year. That's the cost of healthcare, infrastructure, electricity, water resources, agriculture, and ecosystems. So I just respectfully disagree with that, the way in which you framed that. But beyond the economic arguments, I want to drill down a little bit here on one of the phrases that you mentioned in your testimony, which was this notion that natural gas is, quote, helping to clean our air. So you're familiar with the acronym VOCs, with volatile organic compounds, correct?
Sure am.
Okay. And you would concede that some VOCs are known to be directly hazardous to human health. Is that right?
That's correct.
And some of them contribute to the production of ozone or other regulated pollutants, right?
Correct.
And for the benefit of the folks here, according to the National Institutes of Health, VOCs can cause irritation of the eyes, respiratory tract, dizziness, visual disorders, memory problems, damage to the central nervous system, and in some cases cancer. Would you concede that the drilling process of hydraulic fracturing can release what are known as volatile organic compounds?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And just, again, for the benefit of the record, the University of Colorado's Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research, INSTAR, completed a study this year determining that high levels of harmful atmospheric pollutants, such as VOCs, are regularly blown in to Boulder County, here where I live and where so many here in the audience live, from oil and gas wells to the east. They ran over 8,000 samples for VOCs in the study, which is a state record. And there's no other place, program, or organization in the state that has run that many samples for these types of gases. So given all of that, I suspect you'll agree with me that fracking can cause health risks regarding air quality.
All energy production involves health risks for air quality.
I would disagree with you there, and obviously the big focus of our work over the course of the last 2 days has been visiting with scientists that are part of the renewable energy transformation, and I can assure you that the health risks from the various sources of energy that we've been looking at, solar and wind, of course, are pale in comparison to the health risks caused by hydraulic fracturing. And I will just tell you, 2016 Johns Hopkins epidemiological study of more than 400,000 patients show that there was a significant association between fracking and increases in mild, moderate, and severe cases of asthma. Are you familiar with which industry is the top producers right now, or the top producer, I should say, of VOCs along the Front Range?
The largest producer of VOCs in Colorado is naturally occurring sources.
Well, I disagree with you there, and perhaps we'll discuss this further offline, but as the
think that's
studies that
reasonably
we've
well
seen,
documented.
The oil and gas industry is the top producer of volatile organic compounds along the Front Range, which is a region that has failed to comply with federal air quality standards for more than 15 years. And so this notion that the problems in our ozone here and emissions and so forth are being caused by emissions in Asia, I'm sure this is, you're familiar with this, that just in March of this year, our air quality in Denver was 3 times worse than Beijing. So, I just would implore you, and I certainly implore others who are watching, to read the data, to talk to people in the communities that are being impacted here in Boulder County, elsewhere across the state. It is a very real, visceral issue for them. My wife and I have an 11-month-old daughter. We want to make sure that she's able to breathe clean air here in Colorado, in the place that we're lucky to call home. So with that, I would yield the balance of my time.
Thank you.
Can I respond?
Just for the sake of our, before we turn to Congresswoman DeGette, for our panel and for the audience, we would like to have another round of questions if you all are willing to do that. Good. Okay, Congresswoman DeGette, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Well, I think I'd like to follow on to Congressman Negus's questions about fracking very briefly, because as well as the VOCs that result from fracking and which we're trying to deal with on the federal level, fracking also, of course, has the fracking fluid. It can potentially contaminate groundwater, and so last Thursday, I reintroduced the FRAC Act, which I've been doing for some years. What that does is it eliminates the Halliburton loophole that was enacted in the 1990s, which exempts only the oil and gas industry from reporting the chemical components of the fracking fluid from the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so I guess, there are a lot of environmental impacts, as Congressman Negus noted, that come from fracking. And so as a result, Mayor Jones, I know that the city of Boulder recently extended its fracking moratorium. I'm wondering if you can talk about the municipality's reasons for this moratorium and what it's done for your local economy here, pro or con.
Thank you, Congresswoman DeGette. We have a lot of concerns in our community with fracking from 2 angles. One is, as Congressman Negus eloquently stated, there's a lot of public health impacts that come from oil and gas drilling and exploration. And I'll just note that Boulder County Oil and Gas Inspector did a study to look at leaks from oil and gas production and found a 65% leak rate, which prompted the industry, to their credit, to go and do a big push to fix those leaks. But 2 years later, went back to see how we're doing, and it's 45% leak rate because new leaks happen. And that's, I guess my point is, there are a lot of air pollutants, both methane, which deals with climate, and VOCs, which address public health, that come from oil and gas production. And it's a concern of our community. We are downwind. The other side of that is our economy is very much based on a high quality of life. Our wonderful vistas, our wonderful outdoors, being able to recreate and breathe clean air, and A lot of companies are attracted to bring their companies here because of that. So we have a very robust economy, and fracking is at odds with the basis of that.
So, you know, one thing, Colorado has actually passed some of the most stringent laws around fracking in the last few years, but yet you're saying this leaking and some of these other issues, it still occurs even despite the strong laws and, frankly, the commitment of most of our oil and gas companies here in Colorado to complying with those laws.
Yes, the methane rules that were passed were a great step forward. We appreciate industries agreeing to some of that. Get yes, the leaks continue, and we know how much more potent methane is than CO2. And we know that when the leaks rate get in the 10% range, that the benefits of natural gas as compared to coal are drastically reduced.
So let me ask you this. Would it be important for all of these laws, the methane, the CO2, the Safe Drinking Water Act, it's important to have federal legislation that sets some kind of minimum standards. Wouldn't that be accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just have one sort of last question for both of our mayors, because in the light of Congress's unfortunate inaction on climate change issues the last few years, which we hope to change with as all due expediency, local and state governments really have stepped in, and your testimony today is perfect evidence of how that's happened. But I'm wondering if you can tell me whether, in your view, local and state governments can do it without some kind of strong national standards.
Do you want to go first?
I'll just, I think we have to work in partnership with federal, state, and local governments. I represent my community, and we're committed, and we're committed in a way that we keep our heads down and keep working on what works for our community.
Can you do it without us, though?
No,
that's where it doesn't stop at our local boundaries, and that's where working together, and that's where I think there's a state and federal participation as well.
I would just add, we absolutely need your help, please. We have a window of time that's shrinking if we're going to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And I'll just note, local municipalities cannot afford the extreme weather events that we are predicted to see, right? So we definitely need national action. And I'll note that putting a price on carbon at the national level would be one of the most useful things you could do, because it could drive all the markets, the technology, the innovation in all of our communities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Great, so we'll go to a second round of questions, and thank you for your thoughtful questions, members, and answers. Congresswoman DeGette, when you said unfortunate, and you're talking about federal policy action, it struck me, we have really struggled with the Trump administration's rollback of energy efficiency standards, rollback of fuel economy standards for the cars that we drive. America has always been a leader globally in pressing for the most modern technology. And under the Obama administration, again, set higher fuel economy standards for our cars again, only to be rolled back by the Trump administration. And many of the automobile manufacturers didn't want them to be rolled back. And just last week, the California and a number of the automakers decided, well, we can't reseed, we can't cut and run in America. We have to move forward because we've got to compete for the modern electric vehicles of the future. Otherwise, they will be built in China and they'll be built in Europe. And no, this is the United States of America. We have to continue to be the leaders. You all here, I'm going to go to our mayors again. You've been leaders here locally and have a lot of lessons that we can take away when it comes to energy efficiency and cleaner vehicles, electric vehicles. Can you share with us what you have been doing and what you would, reiterate again for the record how important national policy is and what that would mean to your communities, but to communities across the country?
Yeah.
Well, I would just start off, we have to do this in partnership as well. And I think regulatory policy is important, but that's not the only thing. I see our community and our citizens really doing the right thing. And so
Right,
that,
people, I think
and that's where
citizens
the
are
market
hungry.
also plays
They're
a key
hungry
role.
for it. And
Yeah.
they know they can put money back in their pocket,
You bet.
right? Yeah.
And they can see that, and that's where I think it's a partnership. That's why we focused on the climate economy. And if with a global issue, we intend to build businesses that serve the nation and the world. And that's the way we view it strategically in our community.
Well, I'll note that, for example, take electric vehicles. We are very proud that EVs make about 10% of the new car sales in Boulder, so high above the state average and the national average. And part of that is because people care, and people can look at the fuel savings over the life of the vehicle and realize that. But the other is that we have state and federal tax credits that have made that much more affordable. We've also done bulk purchasing programs with Boulder County in order to deliver those savings to households. And so we're working hard to do that. We also have building codes that require wiring to be in place for charging. We are investing in infrastructure around the city and working with our governor on the state. So I think this is a team effort, but I think the federal role in providing those tax credits is key. I'll also note that I believe there's a bill being proposed or has been proposed that would raise the cap on the number of vehicles that a company can sell before they lose that tax credit. And it seems to me that it would be very useful to raise that cap so that the leaders in the industry aren't penalized by their success. Because that federal help to even the playing field on this new technology is paying off, and it's paying off right here in Boulder.
So, Ms. Van Genderen, you were at DOE. You know how important it is for America to continue to invest in R&D and research so that we can maintain our leadership position in the world and build a clean energy economy. What recommendations do you have for us based upon your experience here 10 years after the failed, unfortunate Waxman-Markey bill? We're in a different place. This really is a climate emergency, and we don't have time to waste. What do you recommend?
I recommend that the Congress of the United States find its compass once again. As was noted by Congresswoman DeGette, there has been, and as I also stated earlier, there's been a lot of state and local action in the absence of federal action. I would agree absolutely with Mayor Troxel that this is a partnership opportunity, that it absolutely has to be coordinated between the federal, state, and local levels. We, for example, are in the midst of helping to forge the transportation transformation in this region. This is a global issue that's going to have absolute implementation at a very local level. The transformation in transportation is going to be a partnership between the city, the county, the private sector, the university in this region that looks at strategically mapping where electric vehicle charging infrastructure ought to be placed. What are the sequential steps in the investment to further electrify? How much of the transportation sector should be electrified? If you're still plugging those electric vehicles into 52% coal power, we're not getting to our emission goals. So there are many, many parts to this puzzle, and I would really urge all of us to facilitate a more honest, open dialogue that can result in a good business plan to get us to sufficiently low carbon status.
Thank you. Ranking Member Graves, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Heidi, as Chief Sustainability Officer, if tomorrow you were told you've got to go to 100% renewables, can you identify, just give us a few of the big obstacles that you see in being able to do that?
First, I would counter that quite honestly by saying we need to mine energy efficiency first and foremost. Let's be strategic about what our sustainable energy plan looks like on this campus, in this community. And
so efficiency meaning bringing down overall demand, therefore you can...
The cheapest, least carbon-intensive energy is the energy you don't use at all. And that, we have not put that on the table sufficiently. It is a business opportunity, again, to expand that. We have a campus where there's a very old infrastructure. A lot of the buildings here were built In fact, the first building was built before the state of Colorado became a state. So, you know, welcome to Old Maine. Talk about a nightmare for my boss who oversees facilities. It's like, oh my gosh, what do you do with that? Many aspects of the energy economy. In terms of renewables, there is the whole of the resilience consideration. So how much of the renewable energy future is going to be at a utility scale versus a distributed scale? We are certainly looking strategically at how much we can produce on this campus, but know that regionally there's going to be a broader play again to coordinate with our partners in the city, the county, and the private sector certainly to get to a greater percentage of renewable energy. We're looking at it, we're planning, we're trying to figure out what our next, right now we're looking at the 2.3 megawatts that'll add to the roughly 2.2 that we've already got. And there are, as you know, many questions about how you keep the reliability of a system, the more renewably reliant it is.
Because of the intermittent power and other things where you know, the solar works when the sun's out, the wind works when the wind's blowing.
Indeed.
And things along those. Well, I tell you, if I had a few other questions for folks. So if you don't mind, I'd love if you could just maybe give us something and nothing formal, just any other thoughts you have on some of the obstacles to achieving that goal. You've got kind of this microcosm, and it'd be very interesting to hear some of your other thoughts along those lines.
Be glad to.
All panel members, I get it. Everyone's talking about we've got to migrate to this 100% renewable, and folks saying that we need to stop producing fossil fuels. I want to throw out a few things. Number one, I was reading a report a while back that talked about how for battery storage technology, it takes 50 to 100 pounds of mining, rare and critical materials, oftentimes from China, to produce 1 pound of battery. 1 pound, 50 to 100 pounds of mining, 1 pound of battery. Number two, in 2011, and we had a chance to talk about this a little bit last night, in 2011, there was a moratorium on offshore energy production because of the Deepwater Horizon disaster that trashed much of our state. Don't get me started. But as a result, we significantly reduced domestic energy production. In 2011, the year after the BP disaster, 1/2 of this nation's trade deficit, 1/2 of the entire trade deficit, was attributable to us importing energy from other countries. We've had witness after witness come testify before our committees. If we just come in and just say, hey, we're going to stop producing, it doesn't stop demand because you have a system. I talked about the grid earlier, or the trucks or planes or what have you, that continue to be dependent upon these energy streams. So we still have demand or dependence upon these streams. So if we're going to be dependent upon those, it seems like it makes more sense to produce it where we can do it safest and cleanest, and that's the United States. Mr. Wright, do you want to expand on that? And also, I think you wanted to respond earlier to the question you received from Mr. Neguse.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take both of it. A real quick answer to your thing is just it's best to have honest accounting. We have a much more black and white dialogue than really represents reality. There's 100 tons of coal inside every wind turbine tower. 100 tons in the tower. Roughly another 100 tons used in the thermal process to get the coking coal into the tower. The blades are made in meaningful part out of oil and gas. They're mined in China, they're to transport, to assemble, to monitor. It's impossible to have a wind farm without oil and gas. Impossible. And so we say zero emissions. You just got to do the full accounting. They are reduced emissions, but we should try to talk honestly about it. And Representative Neguse comments about VOCs, which are definitely health hazards, absolutely. And but he seemed to, as oil and gas production has grown in Colorado, VOC emissions are going the other way. More modern wells, we're dramatically reducing the emissions of VOCs, such that total emissions from our sector with 4 times the production is 40% lower. And we talked about one bad day, which was an inversion in Colorado, which is terrible, but we have those in Utah too, not from pollution in Utah. Pollution coming from out of our state into our state is a big issue, and we should account and look at that as well. But I'm for clean air, clean energy, clean environment, the same things we want. I just wish we had a more honest, sober dialogue about it.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if you just beg your indulgence, 3 quick points. One, just looked it up, 83% of VOCs come from non-oil and gas sources in Colorado. Number two, one of the things we talk about these renewable energy jobs, we've got it, I keep saying we got to get this right. 90%, in fact, we talked about this at Enroll yesterday, over 90% of the solar panels are made in China. They stole our technology and are sending it back to us. So we've got to think about how do we ensure that those jobs are anchored here? How do we do that differently than we've seen with those? And lastly, under Waxman-Markey, if that had been enacted, or let me put it this way, through our emissions regime so far, we have actually reduced emissions greater than projected under Waxman-Markey with cheaper energy prices by doing it without Waxman-Markey, and it's an important thing to keep in mind. I think we can keep building on these successes.
But how much farther would we have gotten beyond that? Mr. Caston, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I got a number of questions for you, Mr. Weiner. Really with a focus on rural America, we had in one of the presentations we heard at NREL yesterday, we looked at this map of where renewable resources are and, of course, where the load is, which gets into this conversation about transmission and storage. And they don't always overlap real well, right? The solar is primarily in the southwest, geothermal is primarily in the northwest, wind is in a lot of places, but primarily this big stripe down the middle of the country. Biomass is kind of everywhere, but it's particularly concentrated in rural areas, and the sustainable portion of biomass is inseparable from wildfire risk. Forestry managers talk about wood on the forest floor is fuel. They don't mean fuel for a power plant. They mean fuel when it's a dry summer and a lightning strike comes along. But it is, of course, a source of generation fuel as well if we could access it. And as the only renewable source that is baseload and dispatchable, I think it's pretty important we find some way to get it. The challenge, and by the way, their estimate was that sustainable slice of biomass, we could make about 100 gigawatts. That's about the size of the whole U.S. nuke fleet. It's about 10% of the U.S. grid. It's meaningful. The challenge is that, as all of you know who've hiked in the forests around here, that wood on the forest floor is not necessarily near a road. It's on a steep slope, and it's really hard to get it out. But if we could get it, it's a fantastic job creation. So I'd just like your thoughts with as much time as we have left. I suspect you have some. What could we be doing federally to help ensure that we can cost effectively and sustainably get that fuel out of a place where it's going to burn and just pollute the air into a place where we might use it as a source of renewable energy?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and I know that CSU has done some research on that. USDA did fund the Bioenergy Alliance Network of the Rockies project. This was maybe 5 years ago, a $10 million grant, I believe, through USDA to help our researchers look into using fallen and dead biomass as a liquid biofuel. And so that work is ongoing, and I think it's about to wrap up. So hopefully CSU has some recommendations for the federal government to offer. I agree with your assessment of the challenges. And I suppose the one thing I would add is that I know the Forest Service, the State Forest Service in particular, is looking at opportunities to increase demand for biomass-based projects like boilers and wood heaters. And so to your point earlier about supply and demand, I think if we see an uptick in demand and something like a state or federal Forest Service helping to facilitate that demand, because of advantages financially or environmentally, then perhaps the supply can follow from that.
Well, I guess, and I briefly, one of the companies that I was mentioning I used to run, was a bioenergy company out in California, and what we found was really hard was that the cost of getting that sustainable biomass out of the woods essentially scaled with the cost of diesel, because we had to bring chippers into the forest, diesel-fueled chippers, run those. We had to put it on trucks that could haul it out. And it makes a very narrow radius around a plant where you can get it. And so as a result, it's hard economically to go after. But in the meantime, you still sit there and say, leaving aside, the self-interest of various businesses out there, you fly over and you see all that fuel waiting to catch. And so there's much like the social cost of carbon, there is a societal benefit in getting it out of there and not indexing that to the cost of diesel. But I don't know that we have tools. So are there tools you've seen in place to help give people the right incentives to get that wood out of the forest.
I personally can't speak to those tools. It's not an area that I've had a lot of experience in, other than to say there is a biomass plant in Colorado, in Gypsum, Colorado, on the west slope, that has made it work for them. So I'm happy to find some resources for you and connect you with them.
I would note, Representative Caston, that the fire hazard has changed that equation somewhat on what is viewed as necessary and economic for the recovery of some of that wood.
In what fashion?
In that the fire hazard in the state is so great because of that woody biomass, the red dead trees that you see along I-70, that the imperative has shifted a little bit in terms of what's economic.
So let's find some ways to get it out.
Yeah, and as Carrie noted, the Danes will tell you it's best used for liquid fuel, not for generating electricity from an efficiency standpoint.
Thank you. I yield back.
Representative Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of more questions for our mayors, but before I do that, I just want to address a prior point with respect to Mr. Wright's rebuttal, and that is, I do think this is a conversation that should be sober-minded and focused on the data, and so I will ask for unanimous consent to admit to the record a publication from the Journal of Geophysical Research Atmosphere on source characterization of volatile organic compounds in the Colorado Northern Front Range metropolitan area during spring and summer 2015. Without objection, if that's all right.
Without objection.
And it just suffice to say that I think it confirms the veracity of the statistics that I mentioned earlier. I will also just quote from an article, this is 2 days ago, that emissions from oil and gas wells account for about 12% of Colorado's total release of greenhouse gases, according to the state's best estimate, which it has acknowledged is flawed. The industry is the top producer of volatile organic compounds along the Front Range, a region that has failed to comply with federal air quality standards for more than a decade. That article cites, and this is one of the benefits of having a field hearing here in Boulder, is it cites the science, which is from a study that was published in July of 2017 by scientists at NCAR, which is, of course, here in Boulder, which we were fortunate enough to visit just yesterday. So with that, I would just, again, admit those into the record and proceed to my questions with the mayor. So the question, I guess, Mayor Boulder and the Mayor of Fort Collins, you both mentioned in your written testimony, and I believe Mayor Troxel, you mentioned it in your oral testimony, the work that's being done with the coalition of cities in Colorado. And I wonder if you could expound upon that a little bit. It just is fascinating to me, and I suspect maybe to some of my colleagues on the committee. The cities are very diverse, very different, and I'm curious as to how those interactions have gone and how you were able to build a coalition of cities that are perhaps politically different, obviously in a variety of different ways, to come together around this common goal of bold climate action.
We'll jump in there. We were proud to be one of the initial entities bringing this together, realizing that we all breathe the same air. We all like to ski in our mountains. And some of the folks that are, some of the entities that are participants are mountain communities that are very much dependent on a robust snowpack and not having it melt too quickly and things like that. So there's a lot to bring us together, and there was a recognition that working together across party lines, across geography, across sizes of towns, that we would get a lot more done at the state legislature, and that is certainly borne out. So with the 28 cities and counties, it represents a sizable portion of the population of Colorado. So suddenly we're getting a little more attention. But I'll just note that there's a lot of commonalities. Again, we've touched on some of them, which is the impacts we are already feeling from climate are real. They're costly, they're dangerous to our citizens, and they affect both our quality of life and our economy. And that is the same regardless of whether you are Republican, Independent, or Democrat.
And I would add just to that, there are a lot of similarities between the communities, and I think by coming together, there's also where we can share best practices. Although we might be neighboring communities, oftentimes we don't know exactly what's going on in each other's communities. So being able to share those best practices and clearly the impacts, we can discuss those. But also, what are the solutions and what are we doing? Because a lot of it, at least from my perspective, is translating the challenges into real solutions at a local level. Because it might be land use policies in terms of district heating, or it might be transportation policies, or it might be other sorts of things that, we can translate what is the challenge into what we can do at the local level.
Thank you both again for your leadership. Thank you to each of the witnesses for their testimony, and knowing that we're getting closer to the conclusion of the hearing, we just reiterate again my thanks to the chairwoman and to my colleagues who traveled at great distance, to Representative Graves and Representative Caston for coming to Boulder. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Congressman Neguse. Congresswoman DeGette, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Mr. Wright, I heard you talking, and I do agree that some of these emissions, the CO2, the methane, if there's groundwater contamination, that doesn't just stop at state boundaries or municipal boundaries, and I think that's what I heard you say. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so therefore, in Colorado, for example, the oil and gas industry, they comply with the Colorado rules around fracking and emissions. Is that right?
Yes.
And would you agree with the governor and me and the others? Colorado has one of the strictest methane rules of any place in the country. Is that right?
That's right.
And the industry in Colorado, to your knowledge, tries to comply with that methane rule. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so, wouldn't it seem to you that that probably, if we want to stop methane contamination all around the country, we should reinstate the federal methane rule?
As I talked about,
No, yes or no will work.
Not as currently.
You don't think so, even though methane emissions from other states may come into Colorado's local governments?
There's right ways and wrong ways to do things, but yes, reducing methane emissions is a positive thing to do.
Uh-huh.
I will mention.
But you don't think we should renew the federal methane statute? Is that right?
In its current form, no.
Okay, thank you. Now, I wanted to ask you, Ms. Van Genderen, in your opening statement and in your written testimony, you talked about a number of fabulous studies that are going on about ways to promote renewable energy and all kinds of carbon sequestration and electrification. How close are we to being able to enact those requirements, or how close are we to actually realizing that research and being able to bring it into our daily lives?
It's dependent on the specific research underway. I think that it's also dependent on the devoted resources that are given to the realization of those. Again, we're working on the campus again to make it a living, learning laboratory. Each breakthrough energy technology needs to be deployed in demonstrated fashion in order to prove its efficacy in the marketplace.
So if you get the federal funding that you need to support your research projects, will that help expedite the implementation?
It could absolutely speed it up.
And will some of this research actually help us as we try to move to a zero carbon emissions
There are some, if brought to scale, many of these could be game changers.
Okay,
absolutely.
Thanks. I want to follow up on something actually that Mr. Graves was talking about, because we have really seen in Colorado how having a commitment to shifting from fossil fuels has really worked. I like to talk to our colleagues in Washington about this. In Colorado, the legislature tried for some years to pass a renewable energy standard, and they were unable to do so because of the opposition of the utilities and the oil and gas industry. So finally, by voter initiative in 2004, we passed the first renewable energy standard in the country, which was by initiative, and it was 3% by 2007 and 10% by 2015. This was so wildly popular, the people in the audience know this, that the legislature has now increased the standard 3 times since 2004 with the support of the utilities and the industry. And HB 1001 set a standard of 30% by 2020. Still not enough, but I'm going to guarantee you, with the commitment of our citizens and our businesses working together, that we're probably going to exceed that, and we're going to have to go in and do more. And Xcel Energy, which is one of our big energy companies here, has made a commitment to zero carbon emissions by 2050. Again, not fast enough, not close enough, but this shows how fast this economy is moving, and it also shows when you have a commitment by by local governments and by a state to actually do something, you can do it, and in a way that benefits the energy industry and that really benefits the constituents in the economy. So that's why we can't just sit around in Congress and say, well, if we would have passed Waxman-Markey, then that wouldn't have been enough. We've got to be bold, we've got to be aggressive, and we have to have strong energy standards that are going to not only save our planet, but are also going to improve our economy. So thanks again, Madam Chair. Thanks for having us. We love having you.
I think that's a great statement to end on, but I want to thank everyone for attending today. It's clear that Colorado is a leader, but we need your passion and your energy, your commitment, because we cannot do it alone. As I think was established here today, we can have all the terrific climate action here on the local and state level, but unless we have a bold federal climate action plan, we are not going to be able to reduce carbon pollution. We're not going to be able to adapt as we need to adapt our communities. We're all in this together. So I invite you all to follow the work of the committee, follow us on social media, be an engaged citizen, help us develop this climate action plan. It's only through working together that we'll be able to develop the bold solutions that we need. So at this time, I'd like to advise the witnesses that you may get some follow-up questions. Please work as expeditiously as possible to relay your answers to the committee. Thank you again for the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'll recognize the ranking member for a unanimous consent request.
Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a document developed by Ceres, UC Boulder, titled Accounting for Ozone, showing the ozone non-attainment since 2007 and some of the causes here.
Without objection, and without objection, all members have 10 business days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses. Please respond as promptly as you're able. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you.